Audio check. Right, can I ask all members please to go to their places and be seated? Do your best, lads. See if you can get where you need to be. There's a space up the front here, James, or Rich. Front of the Ken room's fine. That's okay. Good. John? Right. I would like to welcome everyone to this face-to-face meeting of the Council, which is, as well as being a face-to-face meeting, is also a hybrid meeting in that we have members joining us remotely, as it were. They will be joining us instantaneously. So I would make the point to them, those members who are not in the chamber, that can you please put your camera and microphone off until you are invited to speak. You can put your hand up virtually using the hand up function and not the chat function, the hand up function, and that will be okay because I know when you want to speak then, and you will be invited to speak. Can I just make the point that anything that is said either in the chamber or remotely will transmit to the chamber. So anything you say is in front of the public from this minute. Okay. Given the public health recommendations to exercise caution and our own health and safety advice, it has been necessary to limit the number of councillors, officers and members of the public in attendance in the chamber to ensure the meeting can take place safely. As you see, we're just about squeezed in into the using the Ken room as well. The option to use the meeting to join the meeting via Microsoft Teams is being tried for those members and officers who do not yet feel comfortable attending in person. As has been mentioned, they will be able to partake in the debate remotely, but will not be in attendance formally, and members joining remotely will not be able to vote nor count towards the quorum of the meeting. But I think we're okay for the quorum by the looks of it. We're streaming today's meeting live on the internet, and a recorded version will be available to view within 48 hours on the North Somerset Council website. So there you go, that's your weekend viewing, councillors. To avoid the need for councillors to sign an attendance register for today's meeting, and for the benefit of those watching via YouTube, the solicitor will now undertake a roll call of all councillors to confirm attendance. I will then move on to the formal agenda. And as I say, this is a hybrid meeting, and your chairman will be doing his best to fly by the seat of his pants. So on we go. Over to you, Nick.
Chairman, thank you. So as the Chairman indicates, I will just do a roll call in alphabetical order. If you can indicate whether, obviously you're here. I've had some apologies in advance. If any members know of other apologies, if you could let me know those as well. Councillor Applin.
Here.
Councillor Ashton. Present. Councillor Bell. Present. Councillor Bird. Here. Councillor Bridger.
Present.
I've had apologies from Councillor Bryant. Councillor Butte.
Here.
Councillor Caniford. Councillor Cartman.
Present.
Councillor Cato. Present. Councillor Charles. Present. Councillor Cherry.
Present.
Councillor Clayton. Councillor Codling. Here. Councillor Cole. Present. Councillor Crewe. Yes, sir. Councillor Crockford-Hawley. Present. Councillor Cronolly.
Present.
Councillor Crosby is on screen.
Online.
Councillor Davies, I know he's hoping to join us remotely, but it doesn't look like he's here yet. I'll keep an eye out for his joining. Councillor Gibbons.
Present.
Councillor Goddard.
Online.
Thank you. Councillor Gregor.
Here.
I've had apologies from Councillor Griggs. Councillor Harley. Councillor Havison. I've had apologies from Councillor Hearn. Councillor Hitchins.
Here.
Councillor Hogg.
Present.
Councillor Holland. I've had apologies from Councillor Jacobs. Councillor Hugh James. Again, I think maybe trying to join us later remotely. Councillor Keating.
Present.
Councillor Leigh Morgan. Councillor McQuillan.
Present.
Councillor Neve. Councillor Parker is online. Councillor Payne. Councillor Pepperell.
Here.
Councillor Petty.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pilgrim.
Present.
Councillor Porter is online. Councillor Richardson. Councillor Shopland. Councillor Snaden.
Present.
Councillor Solomon. Councillor Tonkin. Councillor Tucker. Councillor Westwood.
Present.
And I've had apologies from Councillor Willis. Thank you, members.
Okay, if I could just remind members who are remote if they can turn their cameras and microphones off, please. Thank you. Right, on we go then to item 1, public participation. And as far as I'm aware, no requests from the public have been received to speak.
That's correct, Chairman.
On we go to item 2, apologies for absence.
I'll take those from the roll call, Chairman. Thank you.
Again, as far as item 3 is concerned, petitions, none have been received.
Correct.
So on to 4, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interest. And are there any? No? Okay, we move on then to item 5, the minutes of the July meeting, which were published with the agenda. And I'd ask the Deputy Leader to move these.
Yeah, I move approval, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Right, that's Councillor Caniford seconding. So all those in favour?
Carried, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Motions by members. We have, I believe, a motion from Councillor Charles. So over to you, Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and fellow councillors. I want you to imagine an election day. I want you to imagine an election day when you've taken a 10-minute drive to your polling station because 4 have been merged into 1, and that 1 happens to be in an area that favours one political party. I want you to imagine an election day with queues of up to 8 hours to vote, where it is illegal for someone to hold your place in the queue or for someone to give you a bottle of water if it's a hot day. I want you to imagine an election day where voter registration drives or awareness campaigns on issues of concern to voters, such as climate change or racial prejudice, are deemed illegal and could be prosecuted up to a year before an election being placed. I want you to imagine an election day where parties are banned on working together to find solutions to our nation's problems, and where young, old, and people from BAME communities are excluded from their rightful vote. And councillors, I want you to imagine that when you complain about this injustice, it's not an independent body or judge that is the ultimate arbiter of the complaint. It's a politician from the ruling party who will decide. This we have seen already. We saw it in November and last year on the streets of Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. And we have, over the last 2 weeks, seen the opening moves to bring it here to the United Kingdom. For the last 2 weeks, the government at breakneck speed has been rushing through a series of bills that will strike deep at the heart of the fragile patchwork of laws and regulations that comprise our protection of civil liberties. The faction that has taken control of the ruling party in this country has, through the policing bill, put through some of the harshest legislation on the right to protest, so harsh that some senior police officers say it is a direct threat to policing by consent. And with the elections bill, the government is setting the framework to tip the scales of democracy forever in their favour. Democracy in this country is in desperate need of an overhaul, but the election bill does little towards that. The bill contains no moves to increase voter registration to bring in the estimated 9 million people missing from the register. The bill does not address increased voter education for the public and an enhanced civics programme for schools. The bill doesn't look to encourage a greater diversity in those standing for office. The bill does, however, force a mandatory voter ID check at polling stations to deal with an epidemic of voter impersonations that led to a grand total of 4 people being investigated in 2019, and by the government's own figures, runs the risk of removing up to another 2.1 million from the register. But that is just the headline. It's what lies beneath that is even more sinister. The government plans to effectively remove the independence of the Electoral Commission, that oversight body for UK elections, putting the steer for the organisation in the hands of a Conservative minister, that minister at the moment being Michael Gove. The government also plans an assault on civic society campaigning by seizing control of who will go on a prescribed list of organisations who run the risk of prosecution for campaigning to influence parties and the public up to a year before even an election takes place. The decision on this also rests with Michael Gove at present, if made law. All at a government projected cost of between 120 to 180 million pounds over 10 years, with no indication of what level of cost local authorities will have to bear. The government has also sneakily added amendments removing the alternative voting methods for mayoral and commissioner elections, making us the only country in the world to actually request more first-past-the-post voting. Perhaps, as Caroline Lucas said in Parliament this week, when elections are pluralistic and fair, the Conservatives usually lose. All I have mentioned is about one thing, councillors, and one thing only. It's about power. They have it and want to keep it at all costs. What can we do? Councils are the gatekeepers to democracy. It is our honour and responsibility to ensure they are decent, impartial and fair elections. This is why I am so fearful, councillors. I am fearful for what this country could become, and I'm asking you tonight to vote to declare a democratic emergency, to sound the alarm, because if we don't and they succeed, none of anything else we wish to achieve will matter, because millions of voices won't matter, their hopes and dreams won't matter. Councillors, this is how democracy dies. Don't let it.
Right. Sorry. Right. I will ask for a seconder and then ask for the support of 7 members as far as a debate on this matter is concerned. So, is there a seconder? Caroline, do you wish to speak to this?
Support first, Chairman.
Sorry, we'll go to the support first. Right, do we have 7 members who would support a debate on this issue?
Plenty, Chairman, thank you.
Yeah, we have a sufficiency. All right. So, Councillor Cherry, would you like to speak on this? No, but you're quite happy to second it. Right. I think Councillor Codling had her hand up first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Charles, for again bringing a very thought-provoking motion to Council, even though I do feel rather over-dramatised in places, I must say. But you're a theatric, and you bring that to the Chamber. There was a lot of detail within there, but there's one thing I'd like to talk about particularly. And you and I know each other sufficiently well that I know your heart is for all things engagement, and that's where I believe you're coming from on this. And I trust that you and other colleagues will recognise that that very same place is where my objection to this motion comes from, while I, of course, will always support engagement in education programmes. So firstly, much of our electoral systems, rules and processes are simply anachronistic. The world and its opportunities, and indeed those who seek to exploit them, has moved far beyond the current incarnation of the Representation of the People Act. Indeed, so much of normal everyday life requires basic photo ID, whether you're using free bus travel, maybe joining a library, or collecting a parcel. The Electoral Commission research suggests that 7.5% of the electorate don't have this kind of identification, which is obviously a real concern. And we know that certain groups, particularly marginalised and vulnerable groups, are less likely to have this kind of ID. But isn't that a bigger question of equality, requiring some real effort and attention, not just a shrug and an acceptance of that's the way things are? And there are several matters pointing to the need for, not the luxury, of reform in this area. For example, party campaigners handling postal votes, the currently legitimate opportunity to register at 2 different addresses. And the often cited pushback is that the number of people prosecuted for personation is low. Well, I agree, but this is because all too often no prosecutions are made despite overwhelming evidence being presented to authorities. And lastly, the MP Steve Baker said, if we fail to understand the magnitude of the corruption of even a single vote, we are a politically bankrupt nation. And that is exactly where I come from on this. My vote's precious, your vote's precious. Suffragists and suffragettes fought for this. Many of our forefathers fought and died for us to have this precious right. So it is simply and surely high time we did our bit too for electoral integrity.
Thank you. So far I've got Councillor Shopland and Councillor Keating and now Councillor Carman. So Councillor Shopland, I believe you were first.
Mr. Chairman, I'm trying out the seats in the chamber for size and for comfort. In the moment, I'm quite happy where I am, but I haven't joined the Tories. But, Mr. Chairman, I will ask you a question. Is there a doctor in the House? Because I think I'm not going to feel very well in a minute, because I'm going to do something which is foreign to my nature. I'm going to agree with someone, and I agree with Councillor Cartman in his opposition to identity cards, because it will deter people from voting, and it will bring us nearer to the nation that most party politicians want, and that is a police state where all dissent is outlawed and all opposition is silenced. That's where local government is heading at the moment. But it's the reasons why people don't vote that concern me. This is an extra one, but they're not voting at the moment. And why aren't they voting? Well, there are many, but the one that I think causes the most apathy is the fact that whoever you vote for, whatever you say, your vote doesn't appear to influence anything. It's just a number in a ballot box, but no one appears to listen. I was elected to represent the people of my ward, to look after their interests, bring their wishes and concerns before this council, where hopefully they would be heard without prejudice and dealt with compassionately and fairly by a committee made up of councillors able to influence and make the decisions as to how this council worked and what it did. And that happened until we came to the executive system and the committees were abolished. And that, Mr. Chairman, removed the individual councillor from any meaningful participation in council matters. We're in danger as councillors of becoming lookers-on, powerless to intervene while the executive members rule in splendid isolation. That's how it appears to the public. That's not a democracy, Mr. Chairman. It's not what our fathers fought for. worked, suffered and died for, we now have a travesty of people power. A country ruled by cliques made up of compliant persons accepting and carrying out any government decree or policy. Just look at Westminster, look around you now. Now that's what the people see, the people on the streets, and they want no part of it.
Councillor
And they're not
Shopland.
going to take part of it, so they ignore it. There's no meaningful debate on matters of local consequences in this chamber.
Councillor Shopland, can I just say you're making very good points, but you're straying a little bit off the motion as Councillor Charles has placed it.
The motion, as I understand it, is basically that identity cards are a reason why people will not vote. And I'm supporting that by saying there are other reasons
You're supporting
as well.
that. Fine. Could you bring your remarks to a close, please?
In any case, Mr. Chairman, let's put it this way. When I look at this council and the people study it, it's as someone said the other day, Bill and Ben and the flower pot men commanded and provided more entertainment than this council does. I don't know whether that's true or not. I would hesitate to pass an opinion. But people do not support this system, and some of the reasons I've given are the reasons why. And we, by our blind acceptance of this fact, are letting our electorate down. So let's do something about it and alter the system if we can.
Thank you. Right. Next person, I think, who had the hand up was Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chairman. And perhaps I can be slightly more concise in my remarks, but I would like to say that I fully support Councillor Charles in his motion. We have a duty as councillors to defend democracy and to draw a line against any attempt to undermine the power of people to vote. And I think the proposals around ID cards and further restrictions of the ability to vote are a travesty. We've heard about some of the remarks about the volume of fraud, and it doesn't exist. I had an opportunity to look at the Electoral Commission website earlier this afternoon as I was preparing for this. In the Avon and Somerset area in 2019, when we had 3 elections even, a bumper year for elections, 22 cases were reported to the police, of which only 6 were to do with voting, only 1 of which further action was required, and that was related to the European elections. These proposals, and particularly the proposals around voter ID, are a solution to a problem that does not exist. Yes, we do need to reform our democratic system, and the best way to do so, I think, would be by bringing forward proportional representation to make sure that everyone's vote does count, and we do have that diversity of debate. So I think, yes, there is a democratic emergency. Yes, we do need to draw a line in the sand, and yes, let us support Councillor Charles's motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Councillor Cartman, I believe, was next, and then Councillor Gibbons.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as most of you know, I stood for election in 2019. When I decided to stand, there were 3 things I was concerned about. Brexit emergency, which I think probably I've lost that one. The climate emergency, which is ongoing, and a democratic emergency, which I did feel, which no one really covered, but I did feel, which is why I'm supporting this motion. I'm not going to go on too much about that, but I am concerned. I'm going to focus mainly on the aspect of voter ID, because on the way here I was listening to the Telegraph podcast, and I'm looking at my Conservative colleagues here, but if you don't do it, it's very good, and I'd recommend it. And they had the Minister for the Cabinet Office, which was Chloe Smith. I have no idea who it is now, if she's still doing it. And to be honest, there is good thing in this bill. There are good aspects to it, I think, which Councillor Codling said about voter harvesting and improvements to postal votes, disclosure of who's funding adverts. But there are things missing. Party funding is one, I would say. And I think we can all agree on that. That's a tricky area. But I do think where she is wrong, both Councillor Codling and Chloe Smith, is on the voter ID. She pronounced 98% of people have the requisite ID. Well, that leaves hundreds of thousands of people who don't. And I think it comes to a point of principle for me as well. Not only is it, as Councillor Keating said, it's practically not a problem. It comes back to Councillor Shopland. One thing I like in this country is the state doesn't demand me to prove my identity when I don't need to. And to vote, I don't need to because there's not a problem. And that's part of our freedoms. If there was a problem, if there was evidence of voter fraud, I would be supportive. But there is no evidence. So I can only conclude that this is being done for narrow party political reasons. And I hate to say that because I think our history in this country is generally we move together as political parties very slowly to amend and evolve our constitution. We see it with the boundary review going on now. Every party wants to do something that benefits them, but we all seem to have a process where we work out those boundaries where everyone settles for something that's workable. This seems to be a step in the wrong direction. I'm also concerned because it also seems to be a minister says local government pays. It will be local government that's to administer these cards and these voter ID cards, and I would only hope that funding will follow, although I think our experience in this chamber is that it may to start with and then may wither. So again, more for us to do with less resource. I end on a hope. I do think governments do listen, and I think they listen when people in their parties and perhaps we talk reasonably about the things that we would like, and I welcome that David Davis is against this. I know he's a very senior member of the Conservative Party. And I know that the government is changing its views, I believe, on planning reform, and we hope that will be the case, because there seems to be a groundswell of opinion across the board that it's actually not very good. I hope with this particular measure, this particular thing of requirement of ID gets that groundswell of opinion. It's not needed, there is no evidence for it, and if we don't all agree and we start disagreeing with each other, the only casualty will be our democracy, and it's for that reason that I support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cartman. So it's Councillor Ashton.
Thank you, Chairman. We do seem to have strayed away from what the actual point of this was, which was, I think, the introduction of photo ID. And I'm sorry, I didn't follow much of what Caritas Charles said. Most people in this country do have or are used to photo IDs for lots of things. You don't have to carry it with you, but they have a passport, or they have a driving licence, or they have a travel pass, or they even have passes to get into, I'm not wearing mine, even have passes to get into to office buildings. 98% of 30 to 69-year-olds have some sort of photo ID already. 99% of 18 to 29-year-olds have some form of photo ID already. So people are used to them. They're used to needing them in certain circumstances. There are already checks in place. I'm just going to read something from the Electoral Commission. There are already checks in place to confirm a voter's identity if they are voting by post, but there are no similar checks in place at polling stations to prevent someone claiming to be someone else. And it does happen. We've all seen outrageous claims in other places, not in North Somerset, not in the West necessarily, of fraud in voting. And so it needs to be tackled. There were questions then, why wasn't the government tackling it? And what's in the paper so far is a proposal. It hasn't got the detail. The proposal we have today seems to me to be against it in principle anyway, and looking for reasons to turn it down, reasons that aren't even going to be in it. Let me go through the Electoral Commission, which is a powerful body and it is independent. And I don't think any government, any parliament would refuse to accept their comments. The UK has, whilst the UK has very low levels of proven electoral fraud, voters should feel confident about their vote. But we do know from our public opinion research, that's the Electoral Commission's public opinion research, that it is an issue of concern for voters, which 2/3 say they would feel more confident in the security of the voting system if there was a requirement to show ID. At the 2018 and 2019 local elections, the UK government trialled voter ID in a number of areas in England. The Electoral Commission carried out independent statutory evaluations in both years Based on the evidence collected, it identified 3 key areas that needed further consideration before voter ID is introduced, if it's going to be. And this covers pretty much everything that has been raised as a concern, so it's already being looked at. Firstly, voter IDs must deliver clear improvements to current security levels. How can you vote against that? Secondly, any new requirement must address the likely impact on accessibility to the voting process. So we're all in favour of making it easier for people to vote. Absolutely. That isn't an issue. This is about photo ID. They've already got photo ID. How do we get people to vote? And I'm sorry, David, I wasn't quite sure what you were bringing in the workings of a council chamber for, but yes, we want more people to vote. That's got nothing to do with whether they actually have to show an ID when they get to their voting booth. They've got to do it if they want a postal vote, but they don't have to do it when they turn up. I've seen other people turn up, well, sorry, I shouldn't say it, should I? And try to vote for other people, thinking they were allowed to. So it does happen. Anyway, any new requirement must address the likely impact on the accessibility of the voting process. Fine. This must be considered for all voters, particularly for those lower socio-economic groups, those with disabilities, and the unemployed. The free local voter document for people who don't have photo ID will be important in keeping elections accessible. That's that point answered. The government will need to set out how it would make sure that applying for the local document is easy and accessible for people who need it. The introduction of a photo ID requirement must not prevent people from voting. Thirdly, the introduction of any ID requirement should be realistically deliverable for electoral services at local councils. It should be introduced with manageable timescales and proper funding, which answers, I think, all the points raised. That was part of the consultation 6 weeks ago from the Electoral Commission that the government have to now answer. To just dismiss it out of hand before you know what you're actually dismissing seems to me to be rather strange and pointless. There's actually an opportunity for this council to support the suggestions made by the Electoral Commission rather than just dismissing out of hand when you don't know what it is you're actually dismissing. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just ask, Councillor Ashton, do you wish to make an amendment to take into account what you've just said? That's fine. That's fine. Okay. Could I ask Councillor Gibbons to speak, please?
Thank you. So we're standing up, are we? I have to stand up. Okay. Right, well, I'll try and be brief because a lot of what I would have said, I think Councillor Cartman has already said. Like him, I'm a passionate believer in proportional representation. And strangely, I've lived and worked in countries where voter ID is normal because in those countries, having an identity card is mandatory and the process of issuing it basically starts at birth and you claim it at 18. We don't have that here. And as Councillor Charles alluded to, in countries like the USA, it's disproportionately those already marginalised groups that lose out. They don't have ID. And in the UK, that's very much the same situation. It's the citizens who never afford to go on holiday that don't have passports, and many don't have driving licences. Research from the Institute for Electoral Reform shows that it is the disadvantaged groups that won't have ID. The government's own commissioned research found that those with severely limiting disabilities, the unemployed, people without qualifications, and those who've never voted are all less likely to hold any form of photo ID. And millions of people here already lack the strictest form of photo ID, such as a passport and driving licence. Government's own research found that 2% of people don't have any form of photo ID, expired or unrecognised or anything, and 4% don't have a recognisable ID. So that's 2.1 million people, roughly, according to the government's own figures as of this afternoon when I went on the internet and checked. So mandatory voter ID is a barrier for many of these people to exercise their right to vote. And we talk about obtaining free electoral ID cards. This could well involve these prospective voters in having to take time off work or travel to council offices or do complicated things that they already find difficult in accessing anything to do with authority. So again, there will be people that will be left out. And this is what I am concerned about in this. It's not just the fact that people without ID may, in a roundabout way, end up paying up, but it's also, as people have said, something that's going to fall to local government. And again, the government's estimations say that this scheme could cost an extra £20 million per general election. So, given that we've heard that the fraud we're trying to address is very, very small, and the latest figures for the Electoral Commission's tracker of public opinion say that 80% of people are confident that our elections are well run, 87% said that voting in general is safe from fraud and abuse, and 90% of people say that voting at the polling station is safe. I fear that this bill is trying to solve a problem that we don't yet have, and I'm not against identity cards for the whole population. We tried that, it failed, but if we're going to do that, it has to be done properly and fairly so that no one is disadvantaged and no one faces a barrier to voting. Thank you, and I will support this motion.
Thank you. We've got Councillor McQuillan and Councillor Crewe, so we'll take Councillor McQuillan first.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief as most of the points I was going to make have been covered by either Councillor Cartman or Gibbons. Fully in support of Councillor Charles's motion. I very much am the sort of person, anyone that's worked with me in the time I've been in the council chamber, that tries to see the best in people and politics, regardless of party. And for me, this is at best a costly distraction from other reform in different parts of democratic services that are desperately needed. And at worst, as other councillors have outlined, it is a threat to democracy. So I fully support this motion. I think, returning to costs briefly, I think it's slightly galling that we're talking about spending money on this at a time when public finances, council finances and household finances are under such incredible pressure that taxes are having to be risen, and energy prices and other things are rising. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McQuillan. Councillor Crewe.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I will endorse everything that Councillor Ashton has said, but I do need to bring a couple of points over. All three main parties have looked at this 2 or 3 times. And the reason was because back in Paddy Ashdown and Tony Blair's time, they discovered that although they couldn't prove voter fraud, it was proved that actually people were going around graveyards looking for people that had died in the last 12 months and sending somebody in to vote on their behalf. And Paddy Ashdown looked at a way of trying to do this and had a meeting with John Major. So it's not something new, and it's not just something new to the particular ruling party at the time. It's been looked at for a number of times. It might very well be that in looking into it in detail, we find there's not enough to warrant having ID for voting. But on the other hand, if democracy is seen to work properly, it needs to be true and genuine. And to be true and genuine means you don't have people being bussed around, which we know happened some 10 to 15 years ago. It may not happen today, but it could happen again. When you talk about the states and what's happening out there, those sort of things never happened before, but it's happening now. So how do we know that it won't happen again? And the fact all three main parties have looked at this not just once, not just twice. You can even go back to I can go back as far as Harold Wilson's time, when he was very concerned about it. So it's not something new that we're looking at, but it's part of the bill. It might very well be that in the end, they think it's not necessary to do it. But actually to rule it out at this stage, to me, doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Councillor Crewe. Is there anybody else? It's Councillor Bell. I'll ask Councillor Charles to sum up once everybody else has spoken.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Bell.
I just wanted to come in on, Councillor Crewe has sort of spurred me into action to comment. Because I think some members, particularly on the Conservative benches, where I seem to be located this evening, it's not a proximity that either of us find very comfortable, I'm sure. people seem to be working under the misapprehension that this kind of voter fraud, it's called personation, isn't already against the law. It is against the law. It's an election offence to impersonate another voter. And we do have mechanisms in British law and in the way that elections operate in order to prevent it. So the idea that this is running amok through our electoral system and isn't being tackled is completely false and misleading. And I'm really disappointed that a party which has benefited from the way the electoral system operates in this country more than most by the misfortune of actually being elected and has certainly controlled the legislation around how we govern elections in this country for many years, including the elections bill that's before Parliament at the moment, takes this dim view of the way the system that they've been legislating for has been operated. I think the other thing that struck me was the suggestion that this is somehow a premature debate. You know, this is not hypothetical. The elections bill is in Parliament now. The government is driving it through. They have not accepted any amendments. The bill will introduce compulsory photo ID for voters. It's not saying we'll look at it, we'll consider it, we'll see what the evidence is. It will be introduced. It will be introduced by the next set of elections in 2022. And the point is it justified? No, it is not justified, because what it does is it puts an extra barrier in the way of voting, and it is most likely to impact. Councillor Ashton proudly listed all of the high percentage of people who have already got a form of voter ID. Well, it's great for them, isn't it? The problem is that there is a significant proportion of the population that don't have a form of voter ID, and it is a barrier for those people. And what a coincidence that it's the very people who are least likely to vote Conservative. So if you happen to be poor, if you happen to be older, if you happen to be disabled, if you happen to be a person of colour, if you happen to be gay or trans, you are less likely to have a valid form of photo ID. So I wonder, is it a coincidence that that's the group that we deem we need tough targets to hit? Councillor Codling talked about, if there's one example of voter fraud, then we must act. Well, I hope that that's a spirit that will apply across all the crimes that are committed in Britain, and that her government will be bringing forward legislation to tackle all of the unsolved and unpunished rapes and drug offences and antisocial behaviour and all the other things that I think are far more important priorities for this government's time than voter fraud.
That may well be, Councillor Harvey. However, at the moment we're debating this matter, and I'd like to call on Councillor Cherry.
Thank you very much. I must say I'm really stunned that this party at the end are so concerned with democracy. I say that as a campaigner on Brexit. And we all know exactly how dishonest and how terrible that election was. So I find it absolutely laughable that they're pretending to care about democracy at this point. As for fraud, there is no evidence of fraud. What there is evidence of is definitely people are intimidating. People will not be able to vote. I have heard when they asked for ID, a lot of elderly people were actually stopped from voting because they didn't have their voting ID at these trial places. So the whole point about this is it's discriminatory. People who do not have passports, either because they're disabled or they've got other issues, will be discriminated against. There is no justification, and it's an absolute waste of time. And this government should be sorting out the fact that there are a large proportion of this country who are struggling, who are going to face appalling energy hikes, energy bills, because of Brexit. And instead, they're trying to distract because of their utter failure.
Thank you, Councillor Cherry. we've given this one a good airing, I think. I'm going to allow Councillor Hogg to speak, and then I'll ask Councillor Charles to sum up, and then, in the absence of any amendments, we will go straight to a vote. So, Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. I completely support the motion. I think we've got a far bigger problem in this country with voter engagement than we have with voter fraud. Rather than chasing half a dozen unevidenced fraudulent voters, why not go after the 30 or 40% of the electorate with legitimate ID who chose not to vote in the last general election? I think in the last election, the turnout was lower than it was in the one that preceded it. So I think we've got a much bigger problem with engagement. And I suppose the question is, how do we engage more people and enable more people to feel empowered to vote? And Councillor Gibbons talked very eloquently about the marginal sections of society who, for whatever reason, feel disenfranchised. And Councillor Cartman also talked about the burden that would fall upon local authorities when we're in such a difficult position. You know, in part of the P&R committee, you know, we're always talking about, it comes down to a question of balance, where you're balancing the benefits of doing something versus the harm of not doing it. And it seems to be a bit of a no-brainer, this. So in terms of the spirit of the motion, I completely support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Over to you, Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief. I'd like to thank my Conservative colleagues, and I'd like to assure them that I am not a fan of party politics. This isn't particularly aimed at them. It's aimed at what they're doing, and I'd be doing this if this was a Labour government, a Liberal Democrat government, or any other government of any colour that actually proposed such measures. But I am astonished, because I believed conservatism was about individual liberty and about collectivisation, whereas some of these bills, some of these contents of the elections bill is some of the most draconian centralisation of government that wouldn't be out of place in communist China. And I wonder how a Conservative party that believes in individual freedoms and liberties can actually justify that. I do wonder that. And with regards to Councillor Codling, who I deeply respect, his views on the issues of the priority for voter ID, I would like to quote Professor Toby James of the University of East Anglia, who's also a Deputy Director of the Election Integrity Project that looks at the integrity of elections around the world. And he did extensive research with polling clerks and voters across the country. The biggest problem identified to the integrity of British UK elections is the keeping of actual legible and accurate electoral registers. It is not voter impersonation. And also as well, with regards to the individual liberties, I'd like to quote a famous radical that said any imposition of an ID on people was a plastic poll tax. That radical was Boris Johnson, and said the British people would not stand for it. How do we engage, to put to Councillor Hogg's post, how do we engage people? I've got a radical idea. Why don't we use the 120 to 180 million set aside for this measure to actually engage with the public and create a democracy that we can all be proud of, rather than chasing ghosts that don't exist? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Vote early, vote often. That's a phrase from Northern Ireland about, well, I first heard it about 30 years ago. Personation was a real problem there because Northern Ireland was a very hard and dangerous place. As far as I'm aware, we're not quite there in the rest of the country yet by a long chalk. So obviously members will vote how they see fit. Right, we'll go to the vote then. So all those in favour of Councillor Charles's motion, will you please raise your hands? Thank you. And all those against? Are there any abstentions?
Motion is carried, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item, which is matters referred from previous meetings, or a previous meeting, and there are none. Item 8, Chairman's announcements, and if you could indulge me here, I've got a few things to say, mostly in relation to getting through the pandemic, hopefully. Things are warming up a bit as far as civil duties of the chairman. I've been to 2 education-related events in the past week. One was a very pleasant event indeed, which was the opening of Chestnut Park School in Yatton, which was smashing. There were only 22 children there. I believe they're year 1s, or they might even be year 0s, I don't know. But they were wonderful, and they did themselves proud, and their parents and the school. And the second one was on Saturday morning when I went along to 2 degree ceremonies at Weston College, and they were very sedate degree ceremonies in relation to some that I've attended. There wasn't much whooping and hollering, but it was splendid. It was great to see those young people getting their degrees and diplomas. I'd just like to say that as from the November meeting, all being well, as long as there's no difficulty with further COVID restrictions, I would suggest that we could return to the post-meeting refreshments arrangements. And obviously a tip of the hat to Councillor Crockford-Hawley, who will be doing the necessary. We'll still be requiring a £5 sub, which I think is only reasonable. Although, as it's the November meeting, the chairman will be providing mince pies. There you go. It's the closest one to Christmas. There you go. Some of you, talking about Christmas, some of you will have received invitations for a chairman's Christmas party on December the 3rd. You are a representative sample of all of the political groups within this council. Most of the guests will be from across North Somerset, and it will be a thank you to people for getting through the pandemic. It's going to be held in Clevedon at Prince's Hall, and I was faced with the situation where there was no chairman's evening this year because the carnival wasn't taking place in Weston, so I thought I'll do something different. So we're having a chairman's Christmas bash in Clevedon. And as I say, some of you will be invited. You are representatives of the council, but by and large, the majority of guests will be from across the community of North Somerset. That's my chair. Oh, one final thing. I'd like to greet and welcome Phil Neve to his first council meeting following his successful election. Was it a couple of months ago now, Phil? It was, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, fine. Well, that's me finished as far as chairman's announcements are concerned, and we will move on to leaders' announcements, except it's not going to be leaders' announcements. I'm going to ask Catherine Gibbons to give a statement on the current situation as far as Ravenswood is concerned. And Catherine Gibbons has indicated that she will be quite happy to take questions on this matter. Over to you, Councillor Gibbons.
Right, thank you. I will stay seated this time because unusually for me, I will actually be reading the statement because it's the very latest and it came through at sort of 5:45, and I'm not that good at memorizing things that quickly. It's been a very, very difficult situation, and I know that a lot of members have had parents contact them because Ravenswood's a much valued school with pupils from all over the district. And when I first got the news, I thought, gosh, this is going to mean such a lot of disruption for the young people. That was my first feeling and thought. And secondly, I just felt that members needed to be kept in the loop and informed as quickly as we could possibly do so. So I did ask early on that you all got a briefing. And what I'm going to go through now is the latest one, which you will receive. I just want to say, because we are in a public arena, as I said at the meeting we held with the parents, that I can't thank the school enough for the way that they responded, the way they managed to get the children out and set up a remote learning again for those who could do it. I mean, something that's sadly all too familiar to most teachers and which we had hoped for these children was something that they could wave goodbye to. And I also want to thank all our officers and the officers particularly from Children's Services, Sheila, and of course our new Assistant Director for Education Liaison, Pip Hesketh, who has worked incredibly hard to liaise with the school, with the major projects team, who I also have to thank because they have worked extremely hard in getting the information we need about what's happening to get the building back and ready for the pupils to go in. And as I said, we had a meeting, Councillor Bird was there, with the parents and staff from Ravenswood School. And it was challenging, as it should be, because they had very, very valid concerns. I mean, it's not a mainstream school. So these are children with anxieties for whom change is difficult to deal with. And therefore, having prepared your child to go back to school, having talked them through what's going to happen, and then suddenly find that the school is closed and they're going to be doing other things, was very challenging. We worked with the school and activity days were put on, and I was pleased to learn in that meeting that out of the 137 pupils at Ravenswood, 111 had accessed those activity days and had really enjoyed them. So, however, without further ado, I will read you the latest situation. As you know, planned works to replace the roof at council-run Ravenswood Special School were commenced in the summer holidays this year. Although the works were planned to be conducted within a 12 to 13-week programme, no phasing was built into the scheme. So whilst work commenced in August, when the children were on their summer break, the plan was to continue the works throughout the autumn term with completion at the end of October 2021. So, as you know, the school opened its doors to students on Wednesday, the 8th of September, at which stage the roof works were still continuing. So during the course of Thursday, the 9th of September, a significant amount of water penetrated the roof and came into the building in classrooms and areas where children were learning. Some of it travelled through the electrics, so the power had to be shut off. And this is where the school reacted so well, and the head teacher was left with no choice but to send the children and staff home. Risk assessments were carried out for each child before they were sent home to ensure that they were appropriately supervised. The insurers were contacted on the 9th of September, visited the site, providing reports to our major projects team with their assessments. Reparation began to the failed roof and to try and make repairs to the electrics. On Monday the 13th, however, there was more rain and further water penetration of the building, causing more damage to the interior, including students' work, sadly. Fortunately, the structural integrity of the building remains intact. Parents have been notified, and since that point, extensive reparations have taken place, whilst the children have learnt from home, supported by staff. So the present situation is as follows. The plan is the current assessment of the work programme and the associated risks give the major projects team confidence to assure us that the school can be handed over to the staff by Monday the 27th of September. This gives the staff 2 days to reoccupy the building and set up ready for the children to return on the 29th. On the premises, work has been accelerated and there's been a significant site presence of trades at the school over the weekend and this week. The team is slightly ahead of where they thought they would be, but where there are any risks associated with having school staff on site at the same time as contractors, we made the decision not to create unnecessary risks to any party by attempting to return the school quicker than it might be safe to do. There was rain on Sunday, which caused a very small ingress on a junction between the guttering and the roof, and this has been fixed. But the school remains out of bounds at present to any party not directly involved with the works without prior agreement. So as I alluded to in my sort of off-the-cuff preamble, in terms of the education continuity and well-being, 111 children attended activity days on Monday, which was remarkable given that the total school is, as I said, 137. This is the first of 3 outings for the children organised this week. The others will be on Wednesday and on Friday. And from the meeting we had with the parents on Monday, we learned, as we knew, that some children were distressed because the transport arrangements were not the same as they are every other day. And that is something that for these children is extremely challenging, you know. And it was quite moving, wasn't it, Councillor Bird, to hear from one parent who felt upset that her child had become distressed on the bus and was aware that this upset other children. So we're looking into making sure that such things are minimised. And we have alerted the transport team to try and keep the children's drop-off order as the same as that which they're familiar with. And we've spoken to the parents about that. Also, parents from the meeting, parents conveyed the distress and uncertainty that emergency measures have caused individual children. And, you know, I fully understand that. Nobody wanted this to happen. Parents have asked how the children will be supported to catch up lost learning. And the team has advised to focus for now on their well-being and make sure that when they go back to school, they feel safe and comfortable and look at the academic side of catching up once they feel that that's okay. And we are committed to take stock with the school at that point. We know that parents have had their lives disrupted, and one parent did ask about compensation for loss of earnings. The team has committed to look at genuinely incurred expenses, but has no authority to compensate for loss of earnings with North Somerset Council's insurance arrangements. Parents, of course, wanted absolute certainty about the date of the 29th for their children to return to school. The team haven't given guarantees on this, but we have communicated the 2 measures in place. There's an independent site visit, that was today, Tuesday the 21st, and a health and safety walk around on Friday the 24th to get and provide additional insurance. And in terms of communication, we've tried our best to communicate to members as openly and transparently as possible, and we're doing so with parents, the first being the evening meeting we had on Monday. Parents were given there lots of space to share their thoughts and concerns, and we tried to respond to these, and we provided them with an update very much as you're hearing now, because one thing we've been absolutely clear about is that the people who need to hear what's happening first and foremost are those parents and the school community. And only then would we inform members and allow things to be, say, become public. I would not want any parent to hear anything from us that they haven't had a chance to learn about, digest, and ask questions on. So I have to thank Kenton Mee, the chair of the North Somerset Parent Carers Working Together Forum, for chairing that meeting so well with the parents, and also our assistant director, Pip Hesketh, who took most of the questions, I have to say. And I have to thank the parents for coming along and engaging with us and sharing their feelings, because it's, although we know the disruption, when you hear of somebody's individual experiences, it just strengthens that resolve that we have as a council, and I have personally, to make sure that we get a resolution and that these children are back in school, happy and safe and ready to start learning and live their best lives. And obviously, we hope that in the fullness of time, as they say, we'll be reviewing what happened and learning lessons and making sure that such disruption doesn't happen again to any children in our care. And I did actually offer my own email address to all the parents if they want to contact me. And I'm just saying to anyone out there who has contacted me, yes, I have seen your emails. I have got a lot of emails to go through. And if I'm a bit slow in responding, it's because I want to respond properly and carefully and not just fire off a quick response. So thank you very much for listening to me at length, and we're ready to take questions, myself and the team.
Right, so far I've seen 2, so Councillor Petty.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. I just wanted to highlight that it clearly has been a very difficult situation, and none of us would want that situation. As a parent of children in school at the moment, after 18 months of that trauma of will your child be in school or not, I can imagine how challenging it was for those families. And I know that you and I have had conversations in my role in engagement around what is the best way and what are the next best steps in helping and supporting our communities, our children and our parents to adjust to this situation. So we did liaise, and from your update there and from information I knew was happening about this meeting with the parents, I felt that was a really important step that we took so that we made executives and officers available to parents. Whether we could solve that problem on that day, what was more important was to listen and to hear their concerns, because every household will be impacted by that. And I know that many households have been impacted, obviously, after such a difficult year, having to miss work, having to adjust their working days, and having to tell managers yet again that you're not going to be in or you can't do the job as you expected, and expecting again your business to, your employer to be patient with those things. I welcome the stance that we've taken on safety, and that we've taken the steps appropriately to ensure that when these children return to school, that they are returning to a safe school. So I'd just like to thank everybody who's been involved for their timely responses, their openness with their responses, and their willingness to engage and to listen and to consider those stakeholders. When I looked on the school's website, they had I think they called it a story plan. So obviously these children have different educational needs, and it was a really lovely explanation using very simple terms and diagrams about what had happened at their school and why it was that they couldn't return to school at this time. So I can see that it's been a very difficult situation, but I wanted to recognise the hard work of both Catherine Gibbons and the officers who have been involved in this, having daily updates and pushing for a swift resolution of the situation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Petty. Yes, in fact, in the meeting, the discussion of those story plans came up because parents were asking, how are we going to reassure our children? And the school were very quick to explain that. And yeah, it's great. It's great the way they've responded. I can't thank them enough.
I believe Councillor McQuillan wants to say something.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Gibbons, for your statement. I also would like to pay tribute to the hard work of yourself and your officers. I know it's a complex and difficult situation, in particular to the Assistant Director of Education, who has put out the updates and dealt with some questions from myself and I'm sure other members as well. There's a couple of points I would like to seek clarity on, but I very much welcome a lot of what's been said. I've been contacted by quite a few parents, and I'm sure other members have. And as Councillor Petty's outlined, it is a struggle. I went through this in January when I was trying to balance being a councillor, working a job and looking after children. And I can only imagine how much harder it is when those children have complicated needs. I think one point where I think, from my understanding, what parents have written to me, where I appreciate a little more clarity, is I understand entirely why the school had to be closed on a risk assessment and safety basis, and I understand the decision that was made, probably I assume in conjunction with the school, to go down the homeschooling route. I think some parents would like to see a little bit of reassurance as to what other options to homeschooling were potentially explored, bearing in mind the emergency nature of the situation because of the pressure homeschooling has put on them, although I do appreciate that there is a helpline and there is support given. If I just carry on and make all the couple of points and then give you, is that okay, or do you want to? I've only got a couple, so if it's okay, is that sorry. Welcome the confirmation there'll be an open and transparent investigation. I think that demonstrates how we're an open council. I'm sure that will reassure parents, and that's one of the points that many of them have raised with me, and I'm sure have raised with yourself and officers as well. I also, you know, the commitment to incurred expenditure, I know that's welcomed again, that's been raised, and I think that will be a reassurance. In terms of the return date that was outlined, I understand obviously you will need, and the school will need, and parents will need to have confidence in that date, and I completely understand and appreciate that contingency plans are also being drawn up. Will those contingency plans be shared with parents and perhaps during the meetings like that was held the other day that I know was appreciated? And finally, in terms of project supervision, appreciate this is obviously a lot of officer time is being put into making sure this is managed well, which is totally appropriate. Can we confirm that that level of supervision will continue once the schools reopen to ensure that everything runs smoothly with both the building work side of things and on the educational delivery? Thank you for the opportunity to raise questions.
Right. So let me go back to the first one was the other options. Yes, absolutely. Well, I do know for a fact that what options were discussed. Everything was discussed in conjunction with the school, and the decisions that were taken were absolutely the decisions that the school wanted to explore. So, you know, this is why we did what we did, and they did what they did. That was very much a joint, I would say, probably it's the head teacher's decision more than anything on that. Right, your second point. I should have taken notes, shouldn't I? Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, that was something that came up at the meeting, and we said very clearly that after the health and safety walkthrough and various tests that will go on Friday, the first people who will hear about the results of that will be the parents. Before me, probably, or anybody else, you know, they will be told what the situation is. So they will have that clarity. Because in the meeting, I mean, there were a couple of people who have children with special needs, who go to Ravenswood, who themselves are working in caring professions and who are desperately needed in their jobs. And they were saying, you know, we need to be able to say to our work, will I be back on the 29th? Will I be back on the 30th? They want that clarity. So we definitely want to make sure that they will know that on Friday. And cross fingers that we're on track. Yeah, and in terms of post-supervision, yes, obviously, we'll be keeping an extremely close eye on that building. And as we said to the parents in the meeting, and I made a personal commitment to that, when we do the review and the investigation, if you like, into how, why, and what happened, it will be transparent and it will be open, and everybody will know exactly what's happened. Because, as you said, we are about being open and transparent across this council, and in this instance, these parents deserve to know why this happened. So thank you for your questions.
Right.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbons.
Councillor Codling, followed by Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Gibbons, for the information and all the staff as well for everything that's been done. What a frightening thing that's happened, actually. So we're certainly very sorry about that. I was pleased to hear you talk about lessons being learnt. That's ever so important. And I wouldn't I, but from my professional hat, I just wanted to add that plea that we learn lessons about the communication and the engagement as well, because wouldn't it be good, particularly with the cohort we're talking about, the principle we'd always want to work to is nothing about me without me. And we are poor, frankly, at our engagement with that client group, if I can use that term. So if we can learn lessons, particularly in the most awful of circumstances, that we ought to be taking back as a whole council, including our emergency planning, of which we are, of course, a key partner for the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Codling. Yes, I mean, communication is absolutely vital at all times, and particularly when things don't go as planned. And as I said earlier, I have to thank, we're really lucky in being able to work well with the Parent Carer Forum and having Kenton to help us set up a meeting like that. And we have said that we will hold another meeting with the parents just to see how things are going. You know, is it going well? Any other concerns? Because I found it really valuable. So thank you.
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question following up from Councillor McQuillan's final question, really. What gives you confidence now, presumably with the roofing contractor, that there won't be further ingresses of water? Because basically they've done it 3 times now. So are we still using the same contractor? Have we changed contractor?
No. My understanding is that it is the same contractor, and what I've been told, and this is one of those peculiarities of the council, in that, in a sense, Children's Services are the client here, and it's, you know, it's another directorate, and it's the major projects team that are delivering the work. But from what I understand, there's all sorts of very rigorous testing going on, and the last of those tests, I think it's fair enough to say there's a hose test, isn't there? Yeah, there will be another hose test. I mean, literally testing the watertight properties of what's been put in place. That'll happen on Friday. So I am hoping that we can be confident, yes.
Are there any other questions for Councillor Gibbons? No. If I could just say from the Chair that I was very impressed by the openness and rapidity of both the executive member and her team in dealing with this unexpected occurrence, and unwelcome occurrence, of course. Anyway, thank you very much, and we'll move on now to the next item.
Nothing from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. On we go then, and it's a political balance update. Over to the Solicitor.
Chairman, as you indicated earlier, Councillor Neve has joined the Council following a by-election. He has given notice and been accepted as part of the Green Group on the Council, and therefore political balance is now as follows. The Independent Group 17, Conservative Group 13, Liberal Democrat Group 10, Labour Group 6, and the Green Group 4. That does mean a change of representation on some of our smaller committees, of which I have notified the group leaders, and we will be taking their nominations now I've announced political balance here.
Thank you, Nick. And now we move on to item 12, the forward plan, and I'll ask Councillor Bell to present.
Yes, I move the forward plan for noting.
And this is merely to be noted. Oh, we have a question from Councillor Shopland by the looks of it. Is it?
Mr. Chairman, the Western Freedom, cycleways, sea fence repairs, etc., will the Town Council be kept fully informed and consulted?
Chairman, if it's me, yes. If it's Councillor Solomon, I'll let him answer for himself.
Yeah, it is me, and you will be kept informed, and we've already had various meetings to keep people informed.
If I can say from the Chair that in my other role as a Clevedon Town Councillor, I updated Clevedon Town Council Transport and Highways Committee, and Councillor Shopland was there on this very matter. Anyway. If your view is, as always, welcome, Councillor Shopland, but you were updated. Anyway, on we go to the, that's to be noted, the forward plan, so we don't have to do any voting on that. Policy and Scrutiny Panel report, there isn't one apparently. And we move on to item 14, corporate parenting responsibilities. And again, I would ask Councillor Gibbons to present this one.
Thank you. Apologies, it's me again. So you'll all have received the briefing, and I hope that you've read the letter that's included in there, which has been sent to the government by the chair of the independent spending, the independent review into children's social care, and we are hoping that that will inform the spending review. I think we're all in agreement that, particularly in terms of corporate parenting, we want homes for children in care to be, as they say, able to keep children as close to community and family networks as possible and to provide genuine stability. And there are various options and incentives for getting better quality, which is in the Case for Change paper that I think I mentioned to you in the last corporate parenting report, which I hope some of you have read. And moving on to the final paragraph about the mental health of children in care, obviously this is something that is a huge concern for us. It always has been, because these are children that have had very difficult experiences in life often and do suffer from trauma. But I think since COVID-19 hit us all, the issue of young people's mental health is even more pressing. So this is for noting, and I'm sure you join me in hoping that the Prime Minister, the Secretary of State for Housing, the local government, work and pensions, the Duchy of Lancaster, and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care take on board these concerns. Beyond that, I just have a few other comments that I wanted to make about our looked after children. And the first one is that we had some very good results in terms of their exams this year, and I think that for all school children and all young people taking exams, this has been a particularly difficult period. But we've had a number of young people who've done exceptionally well, and I would say that, you know, the achievements of our looked after children are achievements not just in terms of the actual academic result. For many of them, to achieve GCSEs and qualifications is a triumph of a lot of adversity that they've gone through in life. So they need to be celebrated and applauded for everything they've achieved. I've got a few figures. I won't bore you with too many details, but I can send out to all members a more detailed report of the achievements of our young people if they would like it. But we had 9 young people who achieved well over 50 GCS passes at grade 5, grade 8s and grade 7s as well, and further 4 passes at grade 6. We had one young woman who got excellent GCE results with 3 grade 8s, 2 grade 5s, as well as a further grade 4s. There were further successes in vocational subjects like bricklaying, engineering, sport, and exercise. And all of the young people will be continuing their education at colleges next term. We had 3 North Somerset care leavers graduate from university this summer with degrees in business, sports science, hair and makeup, and media. Highlights include a care leaver who got a first-class honours degree from Plymouth and is now about to commence employment with the youth mentoring charity. Another young person has gained a 2-1 in sports science. And 4 of North Somerset's care leavers are progressing on to undergraduate degrees this year after achieving a range of level 3 qualifications. So I think you would join with me in congratulating all of them on their achievements. I know that we have, haven't we, already sent a letter in our name as corporate parents and a small token of our esteem and thanks and congratulation for what they're doing. So I don't know if, I think it would be quite nice if we all just gave them a round of applause. Yes. And one quick final point on this information for those of you who are on the corporate parenting panel has already been shared with you. And I would just like to thank those members who have taken on that extra responsibility to become members of the corporate parenting panel. And just to say that I know you're all really, really busy people, we all are, and on occasion you can't attend. But please, please, if you can't attend a session of the corporate parenting panel, try and find a substitute, because you are all corporate parents, and I would like to be able to say that most people have attended at least once. So by substitution, we can get perhaps a circulation of members who will attend and find out a little bit more detail about what happens with our looked after children. And of course, members are welcome to attend the panel if they wish. But as I say, please don't feel that, you know, you have to be a member. You can contact me, or indeed Councillor Pilgrim, who is the current chair, and ask to come along. You will find it interesting, educational, and I think uplifting on occasion to see what our young people are capable of. And some of the meetings they come to, so you can have a chance to talk to them about their experiences. So that's it from me. I will take any questions.
Are there any? Councillor Leigh Morgan, are you indicating you wish to speak? You are. You are indicating you wish to speak? No, you're not. Does anybody wish to speak? Councillor Gregor.
I'm just a little surprised, Mr. Chairman, the word autism hasn't appeared in that report, because autism is a growing problem and we've got to face up to finding solutions to it, especially for those children and young people suffering from autism and the parents who suffer almost more.
Yes, I'd agree that making sure that people on the autistic spectrum get the best possible opportunities is a huge priority. I mean, I've got friends who are on the spectrum, and I would perhaps take issue with using the term suffering. I think, you know, we who are neurotypical don't perhaps think enough about neurodiversity in the workplace, and indeed I would very much like to see this council becoming an autism-friendly organisation and making sure that we do have additional internships and opportunities for young people across the board, but particularly those who are not neurotypical. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Thank you, Councillor Gregor, for that question. We have Councillor James joining us remotely. So, Councillor James and then Councillor Petty.
Sorry, yes, just to thank Councillor Gibbons. People do not suffer from autism, they live with autism and are on the autistic spectrum. I think that comment shows that councillors across it's an easy slip on the tongue, but councillors across the board could do some very useful and handy training, because it would allow us to express what we want to without feeling like we might say the wrong thing. And also speaking to parents of autistic children, which I've done today about Ravenswood, they expressed the urgent need for an autism strategy in Somerset Council. So perhaps that slip of the tongue might refresh the need to have a good autism strategy in Somerset Council. Always helpful, but nothing on the corporate governance as a whole.
Thank you, Councillor James. Councillor Petty.
It was just a minor request that perhaps the dates of the corporate parenting meetings might be circulated to all councillors, because sometimes when you're on a committee you get the invites, and when you're not on the committee you just don't know when they're happening. So it's not a big problem, but that would increase the chance of attendance for some of the other members who don't regularly attend. So we'd work on that.
I have actually just been discussing the possibility of sending the papers that come from the corporate parenting panel to all members, obviously making sure that there's no sensitive information in there, but I think that would be good, because it would be great for all of you to know what's going on and get more engaged with it. It's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibbons. Well, again, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, you probably didn't recognise me with a haircut. Thank you. I'd just like to thank Councillor Gibbons for telling everybody about how well our children in care have done. I think these things aren't publicised enough, that it is possible for children in care to achieve great things, to achieve fantastic things. Too often people assume that children in care are problem children and aren't going to amount to much, which isn't quite obviously true. Having sat through a conference on adverse childhood experiences, I'd agree with Councillor James in that I think it would be beneficial for all councillors to have a briefing on what actually happens to these children and how it affects their mental health. I was quite surprised at the All-Councillor, the Adverse Childhood Experiences conference I sat through in my first year as a councillor. I was invited along because I thought that people knew about how these things affected your mental health. I thought that it was obvious that these things that happen to children affect your mental health as an adult. And apparently, according to the room full of people I was sat, it's not obvious. And if anybody sees what some children have to go through, you really won't be at all surprised to find out that they act out and they misbehave and they become problem children. And I learnt when I was training to be a teacher, there is no such thing as a naughty child. There is a child that has suffered greatly. And if we could have an all-councillor briefing on this subject, I think it would be beneficial for us all as corporate parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. I'd just like to point out that there have been some very, very good webinars and workshops through the LGA on this. I attended one about trauma and trauma-informed therapies and this sort of... So, yes, thank you for reminding us, because we can all educate ourselves on this.
I worked for quite a few years with this particular client group, and the rough and ready way that we decided which children, were likely to be having problems was to find out where, if they knew where they were sleeping that night. That's it. That's the education process started for councillors. Sorry to maybe start it so early, but that's the kind of benchmark that we're looking at. Do they know where they're sleeping that night? That's the kind of chaos that some children have to cope with. Anyway, we note that, but there's no need for any other further work on it. So we go to question time, and I would remind members that can they please, if they ask a question, can they provide the desk with a copy of their question, a note, so that we can put it into the minutes. Anyway, I'm asking for questions. So do any of you have questions? And I will ask the Chief Executive to note who has a question. Over we go. We appear to have quite a few.
Would you mind sticking your hands up just one more time to make sure I've
All right, we've got Councillor Keating, Councillor McQuillan, Councillor Tucker, Councillor Havering, Councillor Applin, and Councillor Pepperell. And we've already had an indication from Councillor Havison that she has 2 questions for Councillor Bell. And as she's already indicated that she's got the 2 questions, if she'd like to ask them, then I would invite her to do so.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, two brief questions for Councillor Bell, please. So, first one is, please can we have an update on whether or how North Somerset Council is conducting the tracing element of the test and trace scheme that we were carrying out in the past? With the ongoing high case numbers, is it actually possible to carry this out in any meaningful way? And my second question is about the messaging we give to our North Somerset residents about COVID symptoms. It's very clear now that they have changed. Vaccinated or younger people have different symptoms when catching COVID compared to elderly people in the earlier waves. So the message needs updating. The most frequent symptoms of an infection in the current Delta variant wave are a headache, a runny nose, sneezing. In other words, symptoms very similar to a heavy cold. Loss of smell and persistent cough are rarer now and occur in fewer than 50% of symptomatic cases. Even if central government has not updated this message, I feel that we need to do this locally, and was a little shocked when our Director of Public Health was quoting the now rather outdated symptoms.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks very much for your questions, Councillor Havison. So firstly on the local contact tracing, so as hopefully members will know, we started local contact tracing back in January, and then from June we were implementing what's called Local Zero. So the idea with that was that our local contact tracing teams were following up every local contact in North Somerset. We're still doing that at the moment, so despite the increase in cases that we had over the summer, we've continued to operate our local contact tracing service. Fortunately, we're able to flex it because we've got an agency working with us to help man the call centres, so we've got a bank of trained staff anyway, and we're able to flex according to demand, and we've always got the fallback of NHS test and trace anyway, so if there are any calls that we're not able to make, we are able to pass that back to the national system, so it's working well. The contact tracing rate has been in the high 80s throughout the period that we've been local contact tracing, and actually that's an artificial figure because actually many have already put their information in on the online system, so in fact the actual contact rate is probably much higher. In terms of the symptoms messaging, so I hear what you say. I mean, what we've tried to do all the way through the pandemic is to follow the same line that the government has promoted. So it's clearly really important that the Department for Health, NHS, NHS Test and Trace, local authorities, Public Health England, others are aligned in the messaging, and at the moment the symptoms have not changed. So whatever people's individual views might be about what the symptom list should include, and I think it's worth noting, by the way, that it's always been a bit inconsistent. So the Americans have had 13 different symptoms since pretty much day one. The European Medicines Agency has had a slightly different list of symptoms. The UK has always tended to focus on the 3. As soon as that advice changes, we will change our advice, but what we won't do is try and confuse the picture and the messaging to residents by, making up our own local variations. The right place for those decisions is at a national level based on the latest data and scientific and medical research, but I'll absolutely pass on your feedback to our public health team.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Right, we'll move on then to the others, starting with Councillor Keating. Can we have your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. A question for Councillor Solomon, if I may. Can Councillor Solomon give us an update on the status of efforts to reopen Churchill Sports Centre? Can residents of Churchill and the neighbouring villages be assured that all efforts are being undertaken to reopen this vital resource for our local residents' health and well-being?
Thank you, Councillor Keating. Unfortunately, I can't give you an update. It's still ongoing. We haven't found a magic solution yet. But what I will do is I'll go back to the team, get an update and pass it on to you, and we'll have some discussions. Thank you.
I think we'll have some from the back. Councillor Applin.
Thank you, Chairman. My question's for Bridget Petty, I believe. It's so an email went round earlier this week saying that residents can expect a discount on next year's green bin charge to make up for the missed green bin collections we've had. I just wanted to ask what the council will offer and how for people who choose not to sign back up to the scheme, of which there are quite a few. According to the World Facebook group. And can I also be assured that the discount for those who do sign back up will reflect the number of missed collections, which I think works out roughly at £1.73 per missed collection? Thank you.
Councillor Applin, it's actually Councillor Solomon who is the responsible member. So over to you, Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we are looking at the compensation scheme, and as you know, we're still at a stage where we can't work out an exact figure because we're not going to know for the next few months going forward where we're going to be with the collections. We're going to a full weekly collection starting again from the 27th. So we still haven't gone into full detail on the compensation discounts scheme, but we are taking everything into consideration, and we'll come to some formula on how we give people a discount either on their next shares or how we move that forward. It's still between us and finance and the waste team as to what we're going to be giving.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. And we'll have another one from the back. Councillor Tucker. Councillor Tucker, can you raise your voice or move to a microphone?
Sorry, Councillor Solomon. Yeah, about 2 to 3 months ago, you kindly replied to say that you were looking into the possibility of trying to obtain a couple of litter bins for Locking Road, bus stop, shelters. I wonder if there's any progress on that, please.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. I'll check tomorrow with the waste team oh no, Councillor Bell has got an answer for you.
I
Great.
can just give you some breaking news that that has been done and they were installed yesterday.
There you go.
There you see, I've done a good job.
Action this day or yesterday. Well done.
I was meaning to tell you that.
So that just leaves Councillor Pepperell.
Thank you. This is Councillor Solomon again. You were very busy. This is on highways. Many years ago, there was a planning meeting in the days when the planning committees were really quite large, about 30 or so, and we were asked to pass the airport link, as it was called, now the runway. And councillors of all parties, absolute unanimity, said it's got to be a dual carriageway because it is virtually a western bypass. But the highways officer said, no, they'd done the research, it wasn't needed. And we argued and argued, but we lost. And so it's a single carriageway. But they did make one concession. They said, we give you an absolute guarantee that when bus stops are put on this road, there will be an inlet for the buses so they won't cause a traffic jam. Now, very recently, 2 bus stops have appeared and there is no inlet. Please, can we get that put right?
Thank you, Councillor Pepperell. Yes, if that's been a guarantee from the officers, I'll speak to them tomorrow and see if we can get that put back right as soon as possible.
I was mistaken. We have Councillor McQuillan left.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, this is for Councillor Solomon. I did have 2 questions on garden waste. One of them, Councillor Applin's already asked and answered, so I won't waste time on that. Very much welcome the resumption of the garden waste service and appreciate all the efforts that have probably gone into that by officers and the company. But I'm just curious as to how robust we think we are in that, and are we in a position where in some ways it would be better to have a... My fear is that bear in mind the national situation, I would hate for us to have to suspend services again. I'd just like a bit of confidence in the date that we're not going to be in this position again. Thank you.
Thank you. I wish I had a crystal ball as to what's going to happen going forward with the lorry driver crisis. I mean, it's across all the media. it's not just waste that's suffering, it's all over, and you're already seeing the shortages on shelves in shops. So, and it's such a fluid situation that day to day things happen with drivers. We may lose another driver. There's a difficulty getting other drivers in. So I can't give any guarantees going forward because it changes from week to week. We've got the plan, and the plan with the satellite sites as well that we're going to put out there. You can still take your garden waste to the recycling centres, and you can compost, which is a great way forward. And I know there's lots of information on our website about that. So I can't give any guarantees going forward, but we're trying our hardest. But the key is to keep normal waste being collected, which we've managed to do. We also held on a lot longer than our neighbours in keeping the service running, and it was really reluctant. We just had some disasters, and we had drivers going out with long-term illness and various other things. So my apologies, but I can't give any cast iron guarantees on that one, Stuart.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. Perhaps I wasn't clear. I appreciate guarantees out there. I'm just trying to get an indication as to the robustness of that date. I appreciate it's a national situation and there's a limitation on what we can do about it.
Again, it's only as robust as the drivers we have. So it can only be robust if we keep maintaining the numbers of drivers we have, and they don't just drop off rapidly, and then it can no longer be that robust. So it's down to the drivers, really.
Thank you, Councillor Solomon. It's, as you say, it is a national situation, and as usual, by the looks of it, North Somerset Council is the middle parts of fortune, as it were. Anyway, on we move. That was the end of question time, done in just over 10 minutes, as far as I can see, which was good. Item 16, reports and matters referred from the executive. There are none. Item 17, reports and matters referred from the policy overview and scrutiny panels. There are none. 18, reports and matters referred from the other committees, again, none. 19, reports on joint arrangements and external organisations and questions relating thereto. Again, none for this meeting. Item 20, the development programme, approval of commissioning plan for development of Western Town Centre sites, which has been published with the agenda. I will announce clearly here that this item has been withdrawn. There's ongoing work to do. It's got to be basically topped and tailed and will be brought back to a future meeting. So we move to item 21, which was an item that was bumped, as it were, from the April meeting. Oh. What does he want to do? Does he? Okay, fine. We'll just trundle back to item 19. As I understand, Councillor James wants to do a verbal update on a WECA meeting
You're never
that he's
free.
attending today, I believe. So,
apologies that it's not written. It happened today. Thank you very much, Chair. Since the last meeting, the Combined Authority met 3 hours ago, myself representing the West of England Joint Scrutiny Committee. On the agenda was climate change. The Joint Committee was able to meet Dan Norris and ask questions about various things, including housing, airport expansion, bus reductions and closures over the last few months. The Scrutiny Commission was supportive of the West of England's principles of refreshed climate ambition, which we felt were much more ambitious than the plans presented in July. And took account for many of the requests that we asked as a commission, including creating a climate change board, which would include Councillor Petty and an environment officer. The Joint Committee today decided to delay many of these recommendations until they could agree on them in October, albeit they are supportive of general framework for data-led investment into climate action with the target of reducing our climate output as a region by 464 tons of carbon per year, or 10%. The Scrutiny Commission were broadly supportive of the Green Renewal Fund, which proposed to invest £20 million into green recovery. As this was a much greater proposal than before, and greater than much of the other combined authorities, we were very supportive of this, especially of an additional possibility of having a multiplier effect through match funding. Unfortunately, the Joint Committee decided to delay this decision, as in their view this was either not enough money or too much money that could be spent elsewise, depending on the authority. This means that it will be business as usual until at least October, preventing any further funding from being spent. Next October, there'll be a large agenda which will include bus service improvement plan and city region sustainable transport settlement bid and increased bus service support, as well as the LEP and Mayoral budget spending reports. Good news is the Joint Committee voted to cease their support of Bristol Airport expansion as a combined authority. This will lead to a submission towards the airport planning inquiry before Thursday, because apparently the region love drama. They're doing everything last minute, but we're very supportive of this. This will not lead to the West of England funding any of our planning appeal, which Councillor Davies and myself were very keen to inquire about. But there we are. There's a last minute update. If you have any questions, fire away.
Any questions? No? Can I just say, Councillor James, that obviously we will be expecting a written report, which will probably be best presented to the next council meeting.
Of course. All done.
Good. Just to say that Councillor Crew and myself are attending a police and crime panel tomorrow, but as neither of us are clairvoyant, we'll be reporting at the next meeting. Okay, back then to item 21, the climate emergency progress update, which, as I was about to say, was bumped from the April meeting, but tonight we've got plenty of time. So, over to you, Councillor Petty.
Thank you. Actually, thank you very much, Councillor James, for that last-minute WECA update, because I know that many of us were following the progress of what was going to happen today. And unfortunately, it does sound like those leaders of those authorities were unable to reach consensus, which to be honest, concerns me a lot. These people claiming to be able to put the climate emergency high on the agenda and yet not reach consensus does feel alarming. So I'd like to thank you for your time this evening, but I would like to take some time just to go through a number of slides. I do appreciate that, that the report is there, and I welcome the fact that many of you will have read all the detail in it. It's always a little bit bizarre, but the council obligation is that the presentation goes into the report in advance, which is very much different to how one might present facts on in another presentation form. I'd like to thank the officers who have prepared much of this content, the Climate Emergency Project Manager, Nikki Webb, but also officers from other departments who also work on areas of climate emergency. I'd like to apologise because I would like to add one additional recommendation to those that are already stated in the report. I would like to recommend that in addition to noting the report, that I, as the Executive Member for Climate Emergency, write on behalf of the Council to Alok Sharma, President for COP, on behalf of the Government, to confirm our commitment and push the Government to demonstrate its genuine leadership as hosts for the International Climate Summit in November. So I hope people can recognise and agree to that additional amendment. This week is great.
Could I just ask for a seconder for that at this point? Does anybody wish to speak to second? You're happy to second. So that's Councillor Hogg.
Great. Do we need more? Shall I carry on for now?
Carry on.
Great.
We'll take the vote later.
Great. This week is Great Big Green Week, and I'm delighted to have heard about events in Clevedon, Weston and Backwell. Today is also International Peace Day. And from many reports I have read, the impacts of climate change risk the peace in many parts of the world. In addition to the events I'm aware of for Great Big Green Week, I also intend to be sharing this report and progress with a wider audience, as I will be hosting a Facebook Live on Thursday and would really like you to encourage your residents to join in. I will be joined by Catherine Gibbons, Steve Bridger and Mike Solomon, other members of the executive. I just wanted to pull out a few highlights and identify some points for discussion. This report before the Council brings data up to March 2021. And as we had agreed previously with the motion to declare a climate emergency, it was agreed that a 6-monthly report would be brought to Council. This is the first ability for us to do that after having had the national figures released. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us we are now living at 1.1 degree centigrade increase in global temperatures, and we are seeing the impacts of that all over the world. This summer, Germany and Belgium felt the impacts of climate change. More than 200 people lost their lives. Our neighbours in Somerset saw flash flooding. In the last year, and even in the last weeks, North Somerset Council has spent significant sums of money on schools because of flooding, as we've discussed this evening. The impacts are on our doorsteps. And although this report will show that the Council, as an organisation, is meeting its targets and reducing its emissions, the work to be done in meeting net zero pledges to prevent the worst possible scenarios are still daunting. Last week, when listening to contributions from the Bristol Airport appeal, an expert calling in from Holland said that this summer, water levels reached the height that models had predicted were going to happen in 2050. The gravity of the situation for all of us is increasing with alarming pace. The Council has a role to play, and the government must also act fast. The challenge of the next 18 months is how committed this administration will be. How committed are we to protecting our communities? I've been thinking about analogies or metaphors this week. And when a tap is dripping, we don't just fetch more buckets. We fix the leak, and this is what is needed with climate change. So, we've taken the approach with limited resources to focus on embedding climate action into everything we do. I'm delighted that carbon literacy is being taken on by people across the Council. It helps to inform teams and catalyse change and appropriate action. It has helped to inform teams and directorate plans, comms, major projects, procurement, the asset strategy, and new strategies and policies across the board. We've also taken a few high-profile decisions to ensure that we have a wider impact on the carbon emissions than just the projects we do ourselves. For example, when we've chosen to reject the airport expansion, when we've taken the waste contract into being an in-house arm's-length company. The Council has agreed to join the UK 100, which forms a powerful networking and lobbying network. And at last Council, we chose to ban the advertising of high-emitting products on our concessions. There is much more detail in the action plan, which was included in this report. Just wanted to remind people, because sometimes the language isn't always familiar to everybody, we talk about scopes 1, 2, and 3. Scopes 1 is what an organisation does. So in a factory, what it makes, but also the buildings and the vehicles it runs. So that is our fleet, and those are the vehicles like the buildings that we're sitting in today. Scope 2 is the energy it purchases, and Scope 3 is everything else. So all the commuting traffic, the waste, the contracts we have, and the supplier relationships. That includes our schools. So on this diagram here on the table, I just wanted to highlight that, as you can see, the number has been going down for Scope 1, it has been going down for Scope 2, and it has been going down for Scope 3. And each one we're hitting very good targets. However, to reduce the target to reduce Scope 1 and 2, we will need to reduce our emissions by at least 422 tonnes of CO2 each year. We're on target to meet this target, but based on the previous 2 years. But further progress will require significant investment and investigation. So potentially we have done the easy things first, and now the hard work begins. Here are a number of ways that the emissions have been reduced in the past year. And none of us could have predicted COVID, but in many cases that has resulted in our employees working from home, so this has reduced our commuting. The street lighting replacement has been significantly reducing our emissions in that area, but once that project is completed, we won't see those reductions anymore. We're continuing to see the electricity grid decreasing its carbon intensity. And that's the same in your household purchases, although the council does choose to buy green electricity. Then if we move on to the area emissions, what you see in that top line is the green transport emissions. So overall, the total emissions for all of these categories have decreased by 265 kilotons since 2005. That is 15%. This is actually not a fast enough change to meet our climate ambitions. Reaching net zero is not a simple task. It requires transformative change across the whole economy, across the whole country. Nationally, the Committee on Climate Change is urging the government to go faster, and so must we. So, we talk about 2100 like it's a very long time away. It is, but equally, my daughter, who's 5 now, will be 85, and we know that more and more people are living to be 85. This budget on here that we have now is to be shared until then. If we take more than our fair share now, we leave our children and our grandchildren with an even harder time to live through. It is not what I want for our children. At current levels, our budget will be used up by 2026. So here it says that the Tyndall Centre carbon budgets for North Somerset recommends that we stay within a carbon budget of 6.9 megatons of CO2 between 2020 and 2100. Just to re-say that again, at current levels, we will use that up by 2026. Adaptation. Climate adaptation is something that often gets overlooked with climate action plans. And this climate change is already happening. We have seen it on the news all summer. Flash floods, heat waves, wildfires. Our own action plan needs some work in this area, although we have started to do some work with our service providers to better understand what is needed. The way we live our lives, where we build our houses, when we take holidays, when we hold sporting events, and the food we eat, even the beer we drink, has developed over a very long period of time with very stable climate. The climate is behaving differently now. It is less predictable. So I wanted to just pull on, there were 10 highlighted ideas from the Climate Committee around, 8 risk areas, but just to draw on 3: risk to food supply, risk to infrastructure, and risk to human health and well-being. So adapting to climate change for us means working with our external bodies like the Environment Agency to understand what is coming in more detail. Ensuring our council buildings and services are resilient to change. Making sure our new local plan is responsive to expected changes. Making sure all our placemaking activities consider the impacts of climate change. More trees to provide shade, better flood defences and drainage. Supporting our businesses and communities to improve their resilience. This autumn, the health and well-being strategy is being developed. Partners, including in the health sector, is being developed with partners, including the health sector. This strategy must prepare us to deliver the care we can continue, and the care we want to give and that we must give, and adapt in the face of changing conditions. It is not just about learning to survive in a future climate, but also how to thrive. I won't bother reading through the long list of all the areas that we have been doing work, but I thought that this list partly demonstrates the breadth of work being done. I do want to highlight how, however, and now, that active travel schemes and the electricity EV rollout will require more resources to bring about the change we require for a healthier and safer North Somerset. It is for us as councillors to look with a critical eye at some of our projects and plans and to ask whether it goes far enough, if it's helping to address the net zero pledges. A few more projects I wanted to highlight. The EV charger in Portishead within a matter of weeks within the top 10 used chargers in the West of England area. It also demonstrates the art of the possible. Solar Together is another innovative approach to helping residents buy solar panels. Please do raise awareness about this with your residents. The registration is still open and there's no commitment to buy at this time, but it's about how we can help our residents to get access to more affordable solar panels. So please do find the information and share that. So, my final slide, thank you. As this presentation has highlighted, there is plenty to do. We're off the starting blocks, but we need to accelerate. Last week, flooding in our schools, I think that highlights the risks that these things will happen again and more frequently, and it's something that this administration must plan for and budget for. This ties into the first point above, that we need to have a strong accommodation strategy. The transport emissions remain the elephant in the room. I think this is the forum for us to discuss it. In thinking about climate impact and how we will adapt, it is about making our communities resilient, healthier, and economically stronger, seeing this as a holistic situation, not a siloed one. The latest reports confirm that we are now 1.1 degrees warming. The IPCC report was trying to help us to prevent getting to 1.5 degrees, and especially not 2 degrees, which is going to see a collapse of our civilization. It is now very likely that we will reach 1.5 degrees warming by around 2040. We used to talk about acting so that we could protect our grandchildren's future. Those days are gone. We are talking about our children's lives. We are talking about our old age. In 2040, my daughter will be 25. I want her to be living her best life, not worried about food security or flooding. This is why I act and choose to take responsibility today. So to return to what I said in the introduction, the Council has a role to play and the government must also act fast. I recommend that we acknowledge the recommendations in the report, and also, as I mentioned, we write to Alok Sharma, the President of COP, to ask government to take this extremely seriously at the Climate Summit. Finally, I want to come back to what we as councillors can be doing to support our residents. Recent comms presentations that I and councillors on the working group highlighted the important point of intention versus action. That's that tipping point from when we want to do something to actually doing it. What does your community need to be more involved, to act? What are your neighbours, your friends, your family? Can you be having these conversations? Carbon literacy training is still on offer for all councillors, and the town councils have been offered that training for the 1st of November, which is the first day of COP. How can the council help you be more informed? And that's kind of the start of the discussion, so I hope that other people might have questions or comments on those questions. Thank you.
Right, we've got plenty of hands up, so we'll start with Councillor Cato.
Councillor Petty, can I ask you to put the slide up with the graph on it, please? That one. That'll do nicely, thank you. As you know, I've only been a councillor for this session, and I'm really grateful that the previous administration were, I suppose, enlightened enough to see that we needed to set a target of 2030 to get our emissions to net zero. And that is not only scope 1 or scope 2, but scope 3. That means the whole area. We have to do it if we're going to hit our targets. Now, about 2 years ago, I asked this council if we could get somewhere where we can get actual numbers on the climate emergency section on all our reports so that councillors can see in black and white how we're doing. It's quite simple, really. It's, are we going towards our goal or are we going away from it? It's not rocket science. It's really simple. And yet, we do still not have anything on those reports, for a variety of reasons, that says this particular project will increase our carbon emissions by X and take us away from our goal by X, or it'll reduce our carbon emissions by X and take us towards our goal by X, right? It's just, so this graph that you see on the screen here, which during working parties I've asked to make sure that actually is published to say where we are and what the chart is showing now. The numbers say that basically if we carry on as we're going now, we will hit net zero in around 2106, I think. Now that is nothing like 2030. My grandchildren will probably be dead by then. Even if they live to, I mean, I'm trying to figure this out, but my grandchildren are 14, all right? So add 85 years onto that. That makes them about 100. Thank you, correct. We have to take this absolutely seriously if we are serious about our commitment. Or we're not serious about our commitment. So every single thing that happens, every single project that comes in front of us, we need to ask that question very, very seriously. And I don't know how else to put this, but as all of us here, I don't care about parties or anything else like that. It's irrelevant to me. What's important is this issue. And we all have a responsibility to look at everything we do and ask the question, could we do it better? We really must do it. So that's my plea to everybody. I'm not really asking any questions. I'm just saying this is my plea. Please grasp this nettle to the best of your possibility, your ability, your insight, your intention, your craftiness even, anything. I mean, grasp it, do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cater. At the moment, I've got Councillor Charles, Councillor Hogg, Councillor Applin, and coming at us remotely, Councillor James. And Councillor Solomon now, and Councillor Cartman, and Councillor Bridger.
And Gibbons.
And Councillor Gibbons. You're on the wrong... Oh, what a... Sorry. Okay, so from the top then, it's Councillor Charles.
I'd like to thank Bridget for this really informative slide, but I don't think it's hard-hitting enough. I don't think it is dramatic enough or harsh enough. And it is not rocket science, what we're talking about here. And I just want to give a little example. I took my 5-year-old daughter, you were talking about your daughter. I took my 5-year-old daughter to Wells Cathedral. She was entranced by the candles in the chapel, and she wanted to light one. And I said to her, when I light one, did you say a little prayer? What did you say? And she said, yes. She said, I hope we survive. That's from a 5-year-old. I hope we survive. And I think we need to do more. And we need to do more fast. I noticed a BBC report that said that 37% of councils that declared a climate emergency are still taking actions that are contributing towards the other direction with regards to tackling this problem. And I think the bravery that we showed in tackling Bristol Airport should be the bravery we show in all aspects of work that we do, with regards to planning, with regards to procurement. Even though government rules may stop us, we must take a stance and say this is wrong and no, and use every method at our disposal to tackle this. And also bring the public with us as well. And I think there should be more public engagement on this. Bridget, I'm asking you personally to be harder on this. I would like to see a report card to show where we are failing and where we are not doing well enough and where we need to push harder. And that you will have a welcome voice from me in actually supporting that. This is an all or nothing. This isn't playing nice with words. If we're not prepared to take this seriously, then we shouldn't be doing it at all.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge the work of Bridget and the team, and thank you for the presentation. We've got to talk about the airport tonight. I think it's hugely significant what's happening in this room and has been happening all summer long. Now, a lot of the numbers that you've put up there show a direction of travel, but of course none of those numbers include aviation, do they? And of course the government's own figures on carbon neutrality don't include aviation or shipping. So, you know, to coin a phrase, we're doing something. I'll say spitting in the wind, but I hope you understand that there's a word there that you'd need to replace for yourselves. But of course, what your report does highlight, Bridget, is that transport continues to be the biggest contributor to environmental impact. 43% of our emissions in the county are from transport. And we know, don't we, that 87% of passengers that fly from Bristol Airport, or the 9 million that were travelling from Bristol Airport before the pandemic, were travelling to and from the airport by car. And we also know that the application that came before the Planning Committee in 2020 was seeking to increase that number by 13,000 vehicle movements every day. Millions more cubic tons of carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge the efforts that so many people have been making in this room, fighting the inquiry, appearing at the inquiry over the summer, Stop Bristol Airport expansion, the Parish Council Airport Association led by Hilary Byrne, Reuben Taylor QC acting on behalf of North Somerset Council, the EasyJet Pilot Union, would you believe it? But more importantly, ordinary members of the public. So, I mean, I don't know how many of you have been watching over the summer the YouTube feed from the inquiry. It's better than any Netflix drama that you'll see at the moment. It's been quite incredible. And, you know, I've been really moved, actually, honestly really moved by the climate scientists, the economists, the business community, but more importantly, just the ordinary men and women and children who have been sitting here making such articulate arguments to uphold the democratic decision that those of us who were brave enough on the night on February 2020 to stand together and vote against the airport expansion. And no matter what the outcome of the inquiry, I think those of us that were brave enough to stand up against it will be shown to be on the right side of history. But I suppose my point is that as long as we live in a society where we're not including things like aviation, you know, it's kind of disheartening, isn't it? But anyway, I do support the work that you're doing and second your motion. So thank you.
History is written by the winners, or so they say, so let's hope we're the winners as one of the 18. So, on now, and we'll take Councillor Gibbons.
Thank you. Yes, thank Councillor Petty and the team for producing this report. And I echo everybody's comments on how incredibly important this issue is. I just wanted to bring things sort of back down to the local or the individual. And as many of you know, I was involved with the Plastic-Free Western campaign, where we managed a high level of engagement in the town and achieved plastic-free status in 8 months. And one of the key things there was giving people, I suppose, bite-sized, easy, identifiable actions that they felt they could take that would genuinely make a difference. So I'm thinking, working with young people, and I know Councillor Petty and I've talked about this, to give young people particularly some goals that they can work towards. I know when I did my carbon literacy training that I made 3 commitments, I think, in order to reduce my carbon footprint. And one of them was eating a lot less meat, because that makes a huge difference. And I've achieved that. I haven't achieved using the car as little as I had hoped, because, you know, our public transport system isn't always as beneficial as it might be for us getting rid of the car. but that's an aspiration I'm working towards. So I suppose what I'm saying is, in terms of engagement on this important issue, I think that young people, and perhaps people in general, need to feel that they can actually make a difference. Because in this current climate, when we're hearing about huge rises in gas prices and possible knock-on effects on the cost of living for a lot of our residents, I think that they'll be so worried about so many other things. They have challenges in their life that this might seem such an enormous thing that they can't really grasp it. So I think if we could bring it back to the individual level and the individual action, and make people realize that all of us can make a difference and that we need to, maybe that would be helpful. But I do worry about our families, you know, that are struggling already, and there's this, and then there's price rises, and there's all the problems and the fears about shortages on the shelves. People just need to grasp an action that they feel they can do, that they're taking some sort of control as an individual. So thanks a lot for listening to me.
I've indicated, well, Councillor Petty has indicated that she wishes to speak.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight on that action. The evidence says that when each of us makes an action and a change, when we share it with other people, they think they can make an action. Okay, we are leaders. We have stood up and we have been elected. You represent your community. You're an advocate for your community, and I need you to show your community what you are doing. I need you to show them that you as an individual and you as a household can make a change, and tell your neighbour, and tell another person, and tell the school down the road, and tell another person, because that is how the change happens. I loved a message that came from a Rinkton resident today that said, I thought I had to use the car to get to the Marine Lake in Clevedon. I kept thinking, I have to use the car. I wish I didn't. I wish I cycled, but I don't own Lycra, and I'm not one of those people, and I'm not fit, and I'm not safe enough. And her post said she did it. She got on the bike, she cycled to the Marine Lake, and she wondered why she hadn't done it sooner. And she's proud of that change, and she's going to talk about that change. I do need you to take seriously, what will you go home today and tell somebody you're going to change? The organisation is doing it. Joe Walker has attended the training. Nick Brain has attended the training. They are making changes in their home and in their organisation. What are you going to do? Tell me what you are going to change. There you go, Caritas Charles. What are you going to change? Tell me what it is, because you want me to take this seriously, and I do. Okay? Thank you. I'm listening.
Right. We will take further contributions once we've heard
Publicly,
everybody.
we need public champions, public leaders. We are them. We are not Greta Thunberg. We got elected to take that seriously.
Enthusiasm from Councillor Petty, very much so, and rightly so. Anyway, on we go to those who haven't spoken yet. Councillor Applin.
Thank you, Chairman. So you listed transport emissions as a focus, and I think that's a really important area. I recently had a conversation with a taxi driver in my ward, and he actually called me because he said despite the climate emergency being declared locally, there wasn't any incentives or encouragement for him to be driving an electric car. And he was actually, his job is only viable because at the moment the amount of work he does for North Somerset, primarily driving hundreds of miles, taking children to schools, which he did make a point of is a rewarding job and something he intends to stick with. So with that being a focus, I just thought we've made a statement by swapping our vehicles for electric ones, but perhaps looking at supporting those who do a lot of miles for us might be something to look at. So yeah, it's just a suggestion from the taxi driver and me.
Thank you. I completely agree. I think we really need to look at our taxis and any situations that we can do to improve their ability to buy electric and shift over to electric, because then until we offer some support, they won't be making that change. But I think that is something we can do.
All right. On then to Councillor Solomon.
One thing that brought this home to me in a big way is I was watching a TV report, and it was during the peak time of the coronavirus situation, and it was in the Punjab in India, and there were families coming out of their houses because they were seeing the Himalayas for the first time in 30 years because of the emissions. So that really brought things home to me of what change is.
Thanks, Councillor Solomon.
Oh, sorry, we'll come back. There's an interesting one because I think that there's challenges around the clean air zone in Bristol. Do we as a council choose to support the introduction of clean air zones so that people can breathe clean air? Some of our residents work in central Bristol and it's not clean right now. It is making them sick. That is not okay. So do we support the introduction of a clean air zone or not? We'll have to think about that and maybe we can decide how we want to write to Bristol City Council because they have delayed the introduction of a clean air zone so that people are encouraged to buy cleaner cars or make a journey differently. Walk, cycle, bus, train, we know there are options out there. So it's an interesting one. What's our position on that?
Right, and we come to, we'll go for Councillor James speaking remotely. Are you there, Hugh?
Can you hear me? Better not ask that because there's lag. So yeah, Councillor Bridget Petty is entirely right when it comes to us needing to be ambassadors in our communities for unlocking climate stories with local businesses and residents. This is something that I hope to start doing around in Portishead, as using COP26 as a sort of incentive by starting a carbon coffee morning. Attending events like the Festival for Sustainable Businesses, the Roadmap to Net Zero events put on within our region, I realised that this is something we haven't done within North Somerset much. We've sort of let the West of England and Bristol Council take the lead and hope that our residents go to their events. Sorry to officers if you are doing this. If you are doing this already, email me and let me know. And 100 apologies. Anyway, let's not pat ourselves on the back too much when we're talking about tackling Bristol Airport expansion when it comes to climate action. This is because doing this is only stopping us from reaching our carbon budget quicker. It's not reducing our carbon output. It's just business as usual, allowing business as usual to happen. Good thing is we are also investing £11 million into decarbonising flight as an authority at North Somerset contributes towards that funding, which is more than we fund walking and cycling at the moment. So at least we are doing that too. That's something we should perhaps be even more proud of than stopping Bristol Airport expansion, investing in decarbonisation of our aviation fleet. Let's let this report guide our actions, behaviours on transport investment, local walking and cycling infrastructure, electrification and decarbonisation of domestic transport, and incentivising corporate electric fleets. We have this plan, JLTP4, which says exactly what Councillor Appleton said, that we need to electrify our council fleet, and it says here that that's something we're going to do. So let's hold them to account. Let's hold ourselves to account and say we've said that we're going to decarbonise our private hire and taxi fleet, and we haven't done that yet. Mostly because it sounds like we're waiting for CAS, the Clean Air Zone. We're waiting for that to happen first before we fund the transition towards it, which seems a bit silly. Again, officers, if I'm wrong, do let me know, because obviously it's not good if we're not saying the right things. People in this room are talking about the need for action, but we also need to recognise our role as actors. If you're not supporting walking and cycling plans in our area, why not? What routes have you suggested that don't already exist? What have you stopped officers from doing? Because you know, if we are allowing our officers to invest time and, more importantly, money in coming with feasibility studies for decarbonising transport, and then we're stopping them from actually doing things. What we're actually doing is stopping carbon action. We're negatively impacting the environment. So we need to be quick when we tell officers that you know, we don't want something to happen, and then we need to challenge ourselves as elected members and challenge our other elected members when we stop walking and cycling, you know, decarbonisation schemes from happening. If, like, for instance, there's some people in this chamber, I'm very happy to share clips of yourself during this meeting in future meetings if it helps you support plans to remind you what you've said you would like to do. So yeah, The only other thing, while I've spoken a lot, I'd like to ask is why has our waste carbon expenditure gone up so much? Is this just because we're not recording the false audit trail of recycling in China and Malaysia now, like we used to, or is something fundamentally changed of our behaviours locally? So after that rant, there's a question for you, Bridget. Cheers.
You can come back quickly on that, Bridget.
There was quite a lot in there, Councillor James. Fantastic carbon and coffee morning. Lots of fantastic comments about the need to check ourselves as to whether we're supporting the right schemes, whether we're supporting the officers' advice, or whether we're shutting them down and not encouraging them to move forward with plans that encourage walking and cycling. I think that Councillor James's comment was asking around increases in waste volumes, and I think I'm going to pass it back to Councillor Solomon or the waste team to follow up, but I think there has been an increase in waste generation over the past couple of years, just volume-wise, incrementally, but on a proportion, from recollection, on a proportion per house, it wasn't. So we're building more houses, but we hadn't, but actually the per house volume wasn't beating that. COVID did change some of those stats, and we saw significant increases in cardboard generation, which I think which was a trend that's been seen across the country. Does that make sense, Councillor James?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was a very specific question, so feel free not to answer it just yet. As in, like, even with even more detail, it was just the thing that went up the most, and that was interesting.
I think it's COVID related, but I'll leave that with Councillor Solomon to return to you with a more detailed answer.
You okay to do that, Councillor Solomon, at some point?
Yes, I am.
Bring
And
a
Bridget,
report forward to the next meeting?
Yeah, and Bridget's highlighted a very good point. It's education on going forward on waste and recycling, and we can make a lot of changes there, and it's something that we really need to educate people on. So yes, she's made a very good point.
Good. Right. On then to Councillor Cartman, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bridget, for the report. And I noticed you did make changes so we could see what was scope 1, 2 and 3, because I always forget, so thank you for that. I think, some great high words and grand statements by people, but I think we need to embrace the reality of this situation, is that we're not only going to not make it in 2030, we're not going to make it until the next century. So let's be honest, our target is shot out of the water, and we need to accept that. Councillor Charles referred to the BBC investigation of a third of councils, and I picked that up, and a third said they're doing things that actually go in the opposite direction. I think what he failed to mention is that we are one of them. We are building a bypass in Banwell. We have a new school in Clevedon. We have new homes on the parklands that we're heavily involved with. All of these are not carbon neutral. This is the reality of dealing with this, and the high words we've heard tonight don't really add to dealing with that complexity, if I'm honest. It's easy to say we should do it. The question is, how? Every single issue is complicated. The clean air zone, Councillor Petty referred to, everyone wants clean air. That's the easy solution. The reality, though, is the way it's been drawn would possibly see an increase in carbon emissions as traffic diverts around through North Somerset. These are the difficult situations that we need to kind of address. The problem comes back to money, if I'm being honest, and that's my challenge back to you in a moment. The National Audit Office has said that government support for local authorities is insufficient for them to be carbon neutral. We know that, and we can see that in your plan. That's what we're facing, that we're not going to make it without government money. So we have a choice, don't we? We either revise our plan or we look to cut our cloth differently. And that's my challenge to you, because if you want to achieve this by 2030 or 2040 or 2050, what do you want to cut? Because that's the choice this council has to make. And I haven't got an answer, but I'm not hearing that debate tonight. And that's the debate we want to make and have. Is it children's services? Is it adult social care? Is it our planning department? You know, I've looked, for example, one of the things I'm looking at the moment is the way we procure services and looking at the social value. But the reality is there is no money to increase social value in our procurement. Just to put all of our suppliers on the real living wage would cost, well, £2 2, 3, 4 million pounds. Something I would love to do. Something our residents would like us to do. But we haven't got the money. So my challenge to this council is if you're serious about this, it's budget time. You need to come to me, tell me what you want to do, but you need to tell me what you want to cut to pay for it. And that's the reality of climate change for local councils in Britain now, sadly. Thank you.
Quickly, Councillor Petty on that one.
Just to say, I do think it made it sound as though the Executive for Climate Emergency was the one who was due to recognise to tell what was cut for others. But I'd actually like the Executive for Finance to look at the budgets and come up with proposals himself as well. So I think it is, I'm not saying, I think that what's so important is that recognising that the climate emergency needs to be owned and led by every department, and that they need to recognise, because if we don't address it in social care, we don't have the means to look after people in their old age. If we don't address it in children's, we don't have the ability to look after children. So it's the collective, how will we find the money and find a way to make it work? And so I think really the ownership is on the we, and we are a collection of councillors, and we all vote on the on the budget, but we also can all contribute. And I think that being a Rainbow administration is acting in the we as to address this very complicated problem. And if it was easy, it certainly would have been solved by now. And I think that's one of the massive challenges we have. If it was easy, somebody else would have done it before us. So we are still on a difficult day, on a difficult page, with tighter budgets than we ever have been. And we face difficult decisions, but we know it will cost more. It will cost us all more if we don't put it in our budgets and think about it today.
Right. At the moment, we've got Councillor Bridger, Councillor Gregor and Councillor Clayton. We'll take them in that order, please. Councillor Bridger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to make a quick point, quite a dry point about procurement, actually, but just to pick up on the point about political leadership, which several members have mentioned. Obviously, there's a point about that. Doing the right thing does not always mean you're doing the popular thing. And that is particularly pertinent, I think, as we head into the last 18 months of this council session. So we need to be all mindful of that as we take those decisions, that we don't show weakness and fall back and not take some of those difficult decisions. So in terms of the report, which I commend, I think it's an excellent report. There's a reference to the emerging climate emergency procurement strategy in that. And I think through the whole report, there's rightly a lot of focus on carbon reduction. But I think certainly with my assets hat on, I think we need to also look through the lens of resilience to climate change, not just carbon reduction. And Bridget, you rightly referenced, I think, the conversation we had earlier about Ravenswood. I think, our assets, our council assets, our estate, a lot of it is barely fit for purpose. Some of it is broken, frankly. After years and years of underinvestment, you're right to flag, I think, the accommodation and asset strategy. I know that the team is looking at ways of driving service change from a climate emergency perspective. But we're having to look really closely, I think, and we'll have to look really closely in the next 12 months, before the next council election, at how we deliver services in the different bits of the buildings that we own. So I know that the team are looking at that now. So when they come to us for decisions, we need to be brave and make the right decisions, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bridger. Councillor Gregor and then Councillor Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a simple message. I'd like to remind you all that there is a substantial difference in insulation between garments made of wool, real wool, Welsh wool if you like, and garments made of cotton or artificial fibre. The more wool that adults and children wear, the less costly artificial heat we would need inside all our buildings. so we could cut our domestic consumption in a very simple way. In the autumn and winter months, for heaven's sake, don't go and turn the heating off. Think of Councillor Petty and go out and buy a woolen garment. Save your money as well.
I absolutely like that, Councillor Gregor. If we can be responsible for restoring the wool trade in the UK and the whole wool industry, I think that we'll be winning, because that's bringing back, instead of shopping at Primark, let's get back in UK-made wool, because that would be supporting our local farmers as well. So, well said, thank you.
We could all do that if we think and then take it seriously.
So don't turn the heating up, put a woolen jumper on. Way to go. James.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think Councillor Cartman hit the nail on the head, and although I don't think any of us in this room are against making a difference, and obviously in relation to climate change, but what feels a little bit uncomfortable is with how Councillor Petty sort of went on a rant about us being elected members. You know, it's very nice hearing all this affluent stuff that's happened, you know, being said, but the reality of it in my ward is that, you know, I'll go and tell my neighbours, you know, a young family that has 3 or 4 kids, you know, 3 or 4 jobs, one kid going to school in the ward and the other kid going to school in town. I'll tell her to make sure she walks and to see if she can get her kids on time. I don't think she'd receive that very well. So the fact of the matter is, what are we doing for our urban areas, our deprived areas where people just can't make these changes? But they are doing their bit, because let's be honest, you know, they can't afford to put the heating on, so they have to sit there in the cold at the end of the day.
Thank you,
Councillor Clayton. Yes, you can respond, Councillor Petty.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Clayton. I don't disagree with you at all. I think that this week we've seen in the news that the emerging energy supply crisis and the pricing crisis is a real problem, and I completely agree. There are many households in our district who are struggling to pay their bills, and they are not wasting their electricity. They're not being flippant with their spending, and they are watching their pennies. I am delighted that there are a number of schemes that the council does do to help residents with their kind of bill management, and also understanding what insulation and improvements to their houses they could access, especially if they're on low income. And I did want to offer that out. If people want additional information from officers, we can offer briefings on things that are being offered, so that they feel better informed of those offers. But that pressing issue of those energy bills is really important. There are, however, other people in the district who have enough money in their pockets to pay for change, so to pay to improve their double glazed windows or insulation in their roofs, to put solar panels on. So there needs to be different offers for different community members in our area, and that's what we need. We need a plethora of choice so that people can make their different choices. And actually, I'm going to challenge you back that a mother or a family with 3 children is worried about climate change, and they do want to know about little things they can do that is achievable. And that's part of the comms work that our team is going to be doing. I see your work as local mayor in Weston, and you're doing a fantastic job. And I'd like to see you upping your role in how you can help local families understand how they can reduce waste and act on the climate emergency. And this is an open offer to offer you any kind of support that I can with that. So thank you.
Right. I'll just give a few words from the chair. I'm a keen member of the planning committee. And one key thing happened, as far as I was concerned, this year, which showed that this council was serious, which was to do with the development on a greenfield site in Nailsea. And we voted through the building of houses controlled by this council and to be built to very high standards as far as the climate change emergency is concerned, so that we are actually doing something concrete or maybe not concrete, maybe we could use someone else. But the point is that I was very, on reflection, very pleased with that decision, because, okay, we were building houses on a treasured greenfield site, but at least they were going to be houses that didn't contribute to the climate emergency. Also, just to say that, without wishing to be a Pollyanna about this, we have won one as the human race as far as coping with emissions from domestic fridges and other such things, the CFC crisis. And it was a crisis that took place, 30 years ago? And if we hadn't done something then, we would now be, I suspect, in a far worse place than we are. So we can do things. We've got to harry the government to impose higher standards and to put that in place across the country, particularly as far as building standards are concerned, so that it's built to the highest standard that can be done to drive down emissions. That's what we've got to do. We've got to do what we do as a council, but turbocharge it, basically. Anyway, I'm not going to allow Councillor Petty to sum up, because she's answered pretty much every question that's been put to her. So we will move straight to the vote, which is to send a message, a letter to Mr. Sharma, who I'm pleased to understand is very serious about climate change. He's the one in charge of the COP26 meeting, and he's up for it by the looks of it. So let's write to him and encourage him.
Chairman, that is the additional recommendation. Also, you have the ones that's printed on the agenda papers as well.
Yeah. So it's been proposed and seconded. So can we move to a vote? All those in favour?
I think that's unanimous, Chairman. If you could just check any against.
Are there any against?
Or abstentions?
Any abstentions?
No, unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
No. Thank you. And guess what? With no urgent business, as far as I'm aware, I can now declare the meeting closed. Thank you, and good night.